On May 16, 1990, the world lost one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived. Sammy Davis Jr. was gone. At 64 years old, after a lifetime of bringing joy to millions of people, Sammy Davis Jr. passed away from cancer. His death sent shockwaves through Hollywood and around the world. But it was what happened at his funeral that nobody expected. Dean Martin walked up to the microphone. Everyone knew Dean and Sammy had been close. They'd performed together countless times. They'd made movies together. They'd been friends for decades. But nobody knew that Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who'd never shown real emotion in public, was about to break down. Nobody knew that this sophisticated entertainer would stand at his best friend's funeral and say words that would make grown men cry. When Dean opened his mouth to speak, his voice was shaking. And what he said proved that sometimes, the most powerful moments come when we stop pretending to be strong and admit that we're heartbroken. If you've ever lost someone you love and wondered how to survive that loss, this story will show you that grief is the price we pay for love. Like and subscribe so you never miss stories about friendship, loss, and the human heart. ***. The man who brought joy to millions. Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't just an entertainer. He was a cultural institution. Born in 1925, Sammy had started performing as a child. By the time he was an adult, he could do it all: sing, dance, act, play multiple instruments. He was a triple threat in an industry where most people could barely do one thing well. But Sammy was more than his talent. Sammy was important because he broke barriers. In an America that was deeply segregated, Sammy Davis Jr. performed in front of integrated audiences. He fought against racism with his presence, his talent, and his refusal to be diminished by people's prejudices. Sammy was a star, not just in Hollywood, but in Las Vegas, on Broadway, on television. He'd won Grammys. He'd won Golden Globes. He'd performed for presidents. He'd been nominated for an Academy Award. But beyond all the awards and accolades, Sammy Davis Jr. was someone who understood something fundamental about being human: that joy is a gift, and sharing that joy with others is the most important thing you can do. The Rat Pack era. In the 1950s and 1960s, Sammy Davis Jr. became part of something legendary: the Rat Pack. This was a group of entertainers: Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, Sammy Davis Jr., and sometimes others, who hung out together, performed together, and defined cool for an entire generation. The Rat Pack represented something special. These were men who loved each other. They made each other laugh. They supported each other's careers. They showed the world what real friendship looked like. And at the center of it was Sammy Davis Jr., a black man in an era when that made him a target, surrounded by friends who loved him and protected him. When other venues wouldn't allow Sammy to perform because of his race, his friends would refuse to perform there either. They stood by him. They made it clear that Sammy wasn't just part of the group. He was essential to the group. Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. had a special bond. They'd known each other for decades. They'd performed together countless times. They made each other laugh. They supported each other through personal struggles. They were more than friends. They were brothers. The illness nobody wanted to discuss. By the late 1980s, Sammy's health was failing. He'd been diagnosed with cancer, but he kept performing. Sammy believed that the show must go on, no matter what. Even as his body weakened, his spirit remained strong. His friends watched him suffer. Dean Martin watched his best friend slowly fade. And there was nothing Dean could do about it. There was no performance he could give that would cure Sammy. There was no amount of money or fame or influence that could make the cancer go away. This was perhaps the first time in Dean Martin's life when his talent was completely useless. He couldn't make Sammy laugh his way out of illness. He couldn't perform his way around death. He couldn't be charming enough to change what was happening. In May 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. lost his battle with cancer. The world mourned. Hollywood mourned. But nobody mourned more deeply than Dean Martin. A friendship that defined an era. Dean Martin had lived a certain way his entire life. He presented himself as smooth, unaffected, cool. That was his brand. That was who Dean Martin was to the world. A man who could handle anything with grace and a smile. A man who never let you see him sweat. A man who was always in control. But Sammy's death changed that. You can't lose someone that important and stay in control. You can't watch a brother die and keep smiling. You can't pretend that everything is fine when the world has lost someone irreplaceable. As Dean Martin prepared to speak at Sammy's funeral, he knew that this was going to be different. This wasn't a performance. This was real. This was grief. This was a man about to admit, in front of hundreds of people, that his heart was broken. The day of the funeral, May 16, 1990, was a bright, sunny day in Los Angeles, but there was a heaviness in the air. Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral was held at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, one of the most famous cemeteries in Hollywood. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. They came from all walks of life. Hollywood stars, fellow entertainers, civil rights leaders, family members, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by Sammy's music and his presence. The service began with tributes. People stood up and told stories about Sammy. They talked about his talent. They talked about his generosity. They talked about his refusal to be limited by the prejudices of the world. But as the service continued, something was obvious. Everyone was trying to be brave. Everyone was trying to hold it together. Everyone was trying to celebrate Sammy's life without breaking down completely. That's what our culture teaches us to do at funerals. Be respectful. Be dignified. Don't cry. Don't let your emo tie-ins show. Say nice things about the dead, and then get on with your life. But Dean Martin was struggling with that instruction. Dean's in a battle. As Dean sat in the front row, his hands were shaking. He was 64 years old, the same age as Sammy when Sammy died. That fact hit Dean hard. He wasn't young anymore. He wasn't invincible. He was watching his brother leave this world, and Dean knew his own time was coming too. People sitting near Dean could see that he was crying. This shocked them. In all the years they'd known Dean Martin, they'd rarely seen him show real emotion. Dean was cool. Dean was controlled. Dean was the guy who could make a joke out of anything. But Dean couldn't make a joke out of this. There was nothing cool about losing your best friend. There was nothing sophisticated about watching someone you love dissipate. The service continued. Person after person stood up to speak. Frank Sinatra was there, and he was grieving deeply. Peter Lawford was there, looking older and weaker than anyone remembered. Lena Horne was there, tears streaming down her face. Oprah Winfrey was there, moved by Sammy's legacy. And then someone asked if Dean Martin wanted to say a few words. Dean looked up. His face was wet with tears. His eyes were red. He looked every bit of his 64 years. Tired, broken, devastated. He stood up slowly and made his way to the microphone. The moment before speaking, Dean stepped up to the microphone, and the entire room fell silent. Everyone leaned forward slightly, wanting to hear what the King of Cool had to say about his best friend. But as Dean stood there, looking out at the crowd, he found that he couldn't speak. His throat was tight. His voice wouldn't come. The emotions that he'd been holding back his entire life were suddenly right there, at the surface, threatening to spill out completely. This was supposed to be a controlled moment. This was supposed to be Dean Martin, smooth and elegant, saying something witty and poignant about his friend. This was supposed to be a performance. But Dean realized something standing at that microphone. This wasn't a performance. This was real life. And real life doesn't follow a script. He took a breath. He opened his mouth. And then he tried to speak. His voice came out cracked and broken. I don't know if I can do this, he said quietly. The room was absolutely silent. Nobody had ever heard Dean Martin admit that he couldn't do something. He paused, gathering himself. He looked down, then looked back at the crowd. His eyes were swimming with tears. The words that changed everything. Sammy Davis Jr. was my brother, Dean Martin said, his voice still shaking. Not because we looked the same or came from the same family, but because we chose to be brothers. We chose to stand together when the world wanted to tear us apart. He paused, wiping his eyes with his hand. People in the crowd were starting to cry now. They could feel the authenticity in Dean's words. I've spent my whole life being cool, Dean continued. I've spent my whole life trying not to show weakness. I've spent my whole life thinking that being strong meant not feeling things. But Sammy taught me something different. Sammy taught me that real strength is feeling things deeply. Real strength is loving people so much that their absence breaks your heart. Dean's voice broke slightly, but he kept going. When Sammy was fighting his illness, I would visit him. And you know what? Sammy would be the one making me feel better. Sammy would be making jokes. Sammy would be singing. Even while he was dying, Sammy was giving. Sammy was performing. Sammy was being Sammy. Dean looked out at the crowd, and his eyes locked with people who'd known Sammy for decades. I'm going to miss him every single day for the rest of my life, Dean said, his voice raw. And I'm not going to pretend that I won't. I'm not going to stand here and be cool about losing my best friend, because losing Sammy isn't cool. Losing Sammy is devastating. He took another breath, and then he said something that would echo through the ages. Sammy Davis Jr. was greater than any of us, Dean said quietly. He was greater because he never let the world's limitations define him. He was greater because he loved without conditions. He was greater because he gave everything he had to make people happy. And now he's gone, and the world is darker without him. Dean paused, and tears ran freely down his face. The truth behind the words. I keep thinking about what Sammy would want me to do right now, Dean continued. And I know exactly what he'd want. He'd want me to be honest. He'd want me to tell the truth. The truth is that I'm heartbroken. The truth is that I don't know how to do this without him. The truth is that I loved him more than I've ever loved anyone except my own family. There was a woman in the front row, Sammy's widow, and she was looking at Dean with tears in her eyes. She nodded slowly, as if to say, yes, that's exactly right. In the Rat Pack, we did so much together, Dean said. We performed together. We made people laugh. We showed the world what friendship looked like. But I think the real performance, the real show, was just us being ourselves. For guys who loved each other and refused to let anything tear us apart. Dean looked down at the casket. Sammy, my friend, my brother, my partner in crime all these years. I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss your jokes. I'm going to miss your voice. I'm going to miss your presence. And I hope that wherever you are, you know how much you meant to me. How much you meant to all of us. The weight of goodbye. Life is short, Dean said, his voice now quieter, more intimate. We don't have as much time as we think we do. And the people we love, we need to tell them that we love them. We need to spend time with them. We need to make memories with them. Because one day, they are gone, and all you have left is the memory of what they made you feel. He took a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper, but everyone in that cemetery could hear him clearly. I'm going to love Sammy Davis Jr. for the rest of my life, Dean said. And I'm going to miss him every single day. And I'm okay with that. Because missing him is how I know that I loved him. And I did. I really, truly did. Dean stepped back from the microphone. He didn't try to compose himself. He didn't try to smile. He just walked back to his seat, tears streaming down his face, and he sat down. The entire cemetery fell silent. Not the kind of silence that comes after applause, but the kind of silence that comes after something sacred has happened, after something real has been expressed, after pretense has been stripped away and what remains is just pure, human truth. People were crying. Celebrities were crying. Dignitaries were crying. The woman next to Dean reached over and squeezed his hand. Frank Sinatra was visibly shaken. Everyone understood that they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. A man choosing to be vulnerable instead of strong. A man choosing to show his heart instead of his cool. What Dean Martin taught us. That moment at Sammy's funeral became legendary. Not because Dean Martin performed beautifully, but because Dean Martin stopped performing. He stopped being cool. He stopped being controlled. He just let himself be human. In that single moment, Dean Martin taught everyone their lesson that our society desperately needs to learn. That strength isn't about not feeling. Strength is about feeling deeply and expressing those feelings honestly. We live in a world that tells men especially, but everyone really, to be strong, to not cry, to not admit when we're hurting, to keep our emotions bottled up inside where they can slowly destroy us. But Dean Martin, standing at his best friend's grave, showed us that real strength is the opposite of that. Real strength is being able to say, I'm broken, I'm hurt, I'm grieving, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm not. The legacy of friendship. What made Dean's words so powerful wasn't just his emotion. It was the friendship behind them. Dean and Sammy had spent decades together. They'd laughed together. They'd performed together. They'd stood together against racism and prejudice when many others wouldn't. They'd been through so much together. And now Sammy was gone, and Dean was left with nothing but memories and grief. But here's the thing about real friendship. It doesn't end when someone dies. It changes form, but it doesn't end. Sammy would live on in Dean's heart forever. Every time Dean performed, a part of Sammy would be there with him. Every time Dean made someone laugh, he'd be doing what Sammy would have wanted. Every time Dean lived his life, he'd be living it in part for his departed friend. That's what real friendship is. It's not just about the time you spend together while the person is alive. It's about carrying them with you forever. It's about letting them continue to influence you, inspire you, and shape who you are as a person. The universal truth. Dean Martin's moment at Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral teaches us something that transcends entertainment, celebrity, and wealth. It teaches us that grief is the price we pay for love, and that price is worth paying. When we love someone deeply, we set ourselves up for devastating pain when they leave us. But the alternative, not loving anyone, keeping people at a distance so we don't have to feel their absence, is a wise kind of death. That's a living death, where we survive but never really live. Sammy Davis Jr. gave Dean Martin so much joy, so much laughter, so much brotherhood over decades of friendship. That joy was worth the pain of losing him. That's what Dean's tears were really about. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for having had someone so wonderful in his life. How Dean's words rippled through the world. The story of Dean Martin weeping at Sammy's funeral spread. People watched the footage. People read about it. And something interesting happened. Men started talking about their friendships differently. Men started admitting that they cared about each other. Men started hugging each other instead of shaking hands. Because Dean Martin had given everyone permission to be human. Permission to feel. Permission to admit that other people mattered to us. Permission to cry. In the years after Sammy's death, Dean Martin changed. He was still cool. He was still smooth. But he was also more open. He was also more vulnerable. He talked more openly about his emotions. He talked about what Sammy meant to him. And people loved him for it. Because in showing his weakness, Dean Martin had shown his strength. In showing his tears, Dean Martin had shown his humanity. In admitting that he was broken, Dean Martin had shown everyone that it's okay to be broken sometimes. The final truth. Dean Martin lived for 6 more years after Sammy's death. He spent those years honoring his friend's memory. He talked about Sammy in interviews. He made sure that people remembered who Sammy was and what he'd meant to the world. When Dean Martin died in 1995, 5 years after Sammy, people said they were glad that the two friends were finally reunited. That wherever they were performing together again. That they were making each other laugh. But more importantly, people remembered the moment when Dean Martin stood at Sammy's grave and admitted that his heart was broken. They remembered that moment as a moment of extraordinary strength. The strength it takes to be honest when the world expects you to be cool. Fire the final word. What happened at Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral on May 16, 1990, was more than just a eulogy. It was a moment when a legend took off his mask and showed the world who he really was underneath. It was a moment when sophistication gave way to sincerity. When cool gave way to compassion. When performance gave way to truth. Dean Martin taught us that day that the most powerful thing we can do is be authentic. That the most impressive thing we can show is vulnerability. That the greatest strength we have is admitting when we're broken. In a world that constantly demands that we be strong, be cool, be perfect, be in control, Dean Martin gave us permission to be human. To feel deeply. To love completely. To grieve openly. And in doing so, he showed us what real love looks like. What real friendship looks like. What real strength looks like. If this story reminded you that the people in your life are precious and temporary, please like and subscribe. Call someone you love today and tell them how much they mean to you. Don't wait for a funeral to express your feelings. Don't wait until it's too late. Because Dean Martin learned the hard way that time is the most valuable thing we have, and the people we love are the most valuable people in our lives. Honor them while you can. Grieve them honestly when they are gone. And carry them with you forever. Dean Martin's tears at Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral were perhaps the most important tears ever shed in Hollywood. Not because they were tears of a celebrity, but because they were tears of a human being who loved deeply and wasn't afraid to show it. That's a lesson the world will never forget.